If we are going to decarbonise as a society, education is at the forefront of that. The next generation of children to come through are going to have a huge challenge on their hand.
I guess young kids maybe feel like they can't do much because they're 12 or 13 years old. Maybe they feel like they're a bit disenfranchised. And one of the things that this enables them to do is to make a material difference in how their school uses energy, uses less energy, uses energy better, because it's them that's actually doing that. They're collating the data. We'd spent 4 years gradually building a platform up that would enable schools to see their half-hourly consumption information, but more importantly, to engage pupils and other stakeholders in the business. All of that kind of stuff helps, I think, kids feel empowered.
The Department for Education have now set out that every school needs to produce its own climate action plan, which is a massive task, right, on schools. But actually what this platform does is not only does it enable children to learn about energy and engage in it in a different way for the school, but also they get to a point where the children can actually champion it.
There are some very, very old, very inefficient schools. They don't have particularly great insights into how good, bad, or indifferent the fabric is. They certainly don't have a database of it. There are lots of other things within schools where no one really knows. This is a good way of starting to gain a much better understanding as to the fabric of those buildings. And once you understand the fabric of the building, you can start to work out what do we need to do. It also helps the school make a business case, right?
This is the perfect opportunity to start engaging at that level now. And if we can create this concept of energy champions using platforms like this, it's just fantastic.
They're going to be the engineers of the future, or the modelers of the future, or the coders of the future, or whatever it is. And they're the ones that are then going to bootstrap us into hopefully a better future.
Guy, thanks for coming up. So we're going to talk about energy in schools today and how we empower the next generation. Can you tell us a little bit of background about you and MyUtilityGenius and energy in schools?
Yeah, sure. So my personal background, maybe we start there, is I've been in energy since 1998. I spent a lot of time in the industrial and commercial end of the market, advising Thames Water or Sainsbury's or somebody like that how to buy energy better. So very sort of high-end commodity market-driven stuff. And then for the last 10, 11 years, I've been working at MyUtilityGenius. So MyUtilityGenius is a business set up by the ex-CFO of USwitch, who thought he had some unfinished business in the energy space, bought a small consulting business, commercial consulting business. There's literally 1,500 in the UK, but with a specific remit of trying to build out a domestic comparison and switching platform that maybe could look at doing things differently to the way that the incumbency was doing it. And we set that up, started running it over what has turned out to be 10 of the more exciting years in the energy sector. And so we have had to deploy the dreaded pivot word a few times in the course of that. And where we ended up was focusing very much on the sort of the more complex elements of the energy comparison markets. And as part of that, we ended up working with Samsung on a project that was a real mouthful. It's the ND-CEMEC project, which is the worst acronym in the world. Stands for Non-Domestic Smart Energy Innovation Competition, I think is actually what it fully stands for. And effectively, that was really focused on trying to find a way of incentivizing the commercial market to install smart meters. So, because a lot of people weren't volunteering, they weren't sticking their hand up, mainly because no one was effectively selling the benefits of having a smart meter. So they wanted to try and encourage innovation and development and new products, new services, and that kind of thing to effectively work in that space. And you had a choice of high street retail, beverages and restaurants and that kind of thing, and schools. And Samsung definitely went down the schools route, and they needed somebody that could do comparison of tariffs and look at time of use and the origination of time of use stuff. So we then spent 4 years gradually building a platform up that would enable schools to see their half-hourly consumption information, but more importantly, to engage pupils and other stakeholders in the business. Because there are a few things around that basically will show you what, graphs of your half-hourly consumption data and that kind of stuff, and your M&T platforms, that sort of thing. But they're very rarely sort of engaged with the people that are actually in the school. So engaged with pupils, gave them an ability to engage with energy at a data level. So the key bit about the Energy in Schools platform was really around effectively using microbits to code different instructions and use energy data, whether it's half-hourly data, whether it's grid intensity information, to basically say, I'm going to write a little code, drop it in this little basically motherboard, and it will then tell an LED light strip to turn green if today the national grid is being powered principally by renewables, and if it's being powered principally by coal, then make it red and nasty and whale, or whatever you could actually do with it. So that, broadly speaking, is how we ended up in the Energy in Schools space. And when that project came to a conclusion, it seemed like such a good product and such a good service that we wanted to keep it going.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, look, I think it's such an important topic, and if you kind of take a step back and look at the challenge we've got as a country, well, globally really, in terms of achieving net zero and everything, the vast majority of effort is going to come from children that are in schools at the moment, right? So they've got a huge challenge on their hand that we are partly leaving them, and if we can play a role in helping to educate the next generation in this and create a pathway into our industry, in the energy industry, but also engage and start to get children excited and understand about not just where energy comes from, but what the kind of opportunities you can have off the back of it, then it's fantastic, and that's why SMS have got involved in it, and it's certainly a product that I'm really proud of. So I think it's great that we're talking about that today. Just from so for my part, I think education is clearly a massive part of the energy transition for the country, right? But what the Energy in Schools platform does is engage in the school's energy consumption, but also it delivers a load of lesson plans as well, doesn't it? And there was a big part of the project where you worked, I think, with universities and other teachers to create the lesson plans.
Yeah, so it wasn't just us and Samsung. There was also the University of Lancaster. There was the Centre for Sustainable Energy based out of Bristol, and they put together teaching plans that dovetailed with STEM subjects, that basically ticked all the necessary boxes that you'd have for sort of year 6, year 7, year 8, that sort of age bracket, where it was looking at, could you code things? So utilizing the Microsoft platform for effectively building code and utilizing code in schools. It enabled you to put lessons together about batteries and how batteries work, and sort of introduce kids to, in a age-appropriate kind of way, the sorts of things that they're going to be grappling with over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. And when you start introducing things like microbits, where you actually write a code, you load it onto something, it actually, gives you feedback. And then you can use that to monitor, I don't know, the temperature in your classroom, or you can use it to monitor how often a door opens and closes in the hallway, which leads to, hot air being lost and all that kind of thing. It gives kids, I think, skin in the game. So yes, you've got all of the protests, and you've got Greta Thunberg doing her thing and all that sort of stuff. And I guess young kids maybe feel like they can't do much because they're 12 or 13 years old, so they can badger their parents, but they don't. Maybe they feel like they're a bit disenfranchised. And one of the things that this enables them to do is to make a material difference in how their school uses energy, uses less energy, uses energy better, because it's them that's actually recording the fact that it was really hot in the gym at 9 o'clock at night. Why? There was nobody in the school. It's them that's actually doing that. They're collating the data. They're also looking at the fabric of the school and working out where double glazing is, where triple glazing is, where they've got draft excluders. But all of that kind of stuff helps, I think, kids feel empowered to do things. And you get so much more traction out of a school-based program where the kids are really involved. I think if all it is just passive teach. I mean, I've got two kids, 16 and 11. And the only things that they get really excited about are anything where there's some practical element to it, where they're actually getting involved. Yeah. And this is definitely one of the ways that we were able to do that. So it's really cool from that perspective.
I think one of the other things is the Department for Education have now set out that every school needs to produce its own climate action plan and how they're going to start to transition the school, which is a massive task, right, on schools and public authorities and teachers. But actually what this platform does is not only does it enable children to learn about energy and engage in it in a different way for the school, but also they get to a point where the children can actually champion it and build the school's climate action plan using the platform, which is just fantastic, right? So you talked about microbits there being really key. So can just tell me what is a microbit?
Okay, right. So microbit's about that big, thereabouts. It looks like a little motherboard, but it's got the ability to have little micro USBs that you can plug into it. It's got LEDs on it that can basically flash messages up. It's got a temperature sensor. It's got a light sensor. It's actually, I think it's even got a magnetometer. So you can you could blue tack it to a plug and it will read the electrons going through that. It also has the ability, if you drop it, to be able to measure gravity and measure all those sorts of things. We haven't found out a use yet for dropping it on the floor, but they are they're really clever bits of kit. And it was all part of a BBC rollout, 2016, 2017, where basically they rolled out 2 to 4 million of these across schools around the country. So one of the other benefits is obviously when you pitch up at a school going, this is a great idea, you're not then springing on them something that looks like it fell straight out of, the moon landing kit. It's like, it's something they've seen before, they know exists. So what it enables, it's like it captures data at a local level. So it will record, if you code it correctly, it'll record the temperature every half hour in the corner of the room. Or it will record how often the magnetic field is broken as a door opens and closes next to it. Or it'll record the flow of electrons through a plug if you're trying to measure, your printer or whatever. All that data is then stored in the microbit. The microbit can then be uploaded to the cloud or uploaded to, in this case, the Energy in Schools platform. You can use that information to display. But what it will also do is that when you're not using it for those sorts of purposes, kids can sit there and practice coding on it. So effectively, you'll go, things like, as I mentioned earlier, sort of, if the national grid energy intensity carbon intensity is below 20%, I want this shade of green. If it's below 10%, I want that shade of green on an LED. Download the code into the microbit, plug it in, talk to National Grid's API and says, right, okay, this is the carbon intensity for the day, and happy days. Their program will work or not, depending on how well the kid's done it, with LED basically glowing a different shade of green. So they're very kind of sort of motherboardy. I'm too old for this stuff. It's like abacus. But in terms of this stuff, they're really good for doing that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. And I think for me one of the key takeaways from getting to know the program was that the microbits were pre-coded, weren't they? So they when they're delivered into a school, and I guess actually just to take a step back, this is suitable across all different schools, right? So from Key Stage 2 and upwards.
Yeah, and actually what was quite interesting about that is like the whole thing was kind of designed for, as I mentioned, like year 6, year 7, year 8. It was that sort of age. One of the first people to take this up, and I know they won't mind me mentioning it because they want to be cutting edge, is Bath College, which is further education. So they don't even have year 6, 7, and 8. They've got years, whatever it is, 12 and 13, basically. But it had so many things that they thought would engage their kids that they actually wanted to pick it up and use it. So what has been interesting is that the potential use cases for this, I think we originally thought would just be this reasonably narrow band in schools. Actually, it probably expands much further up the education ladder than that. And actually, at a theoretical level, you can probably also take it into non-educational areas, because everybody wants to know what's using energy in their building, right? And that's what SMS, that's what smart is all about. But ultimately, a smart meter can still only tell you what's going into the building. It can't tell you where in the building stuff is being used, lost, where inefficiencies are, and all that kind of stuff. things like microbits start to give you that level of insight into what's going on. So yeah, it's good from that perspective. But we code everything so that the idea is that it should be, out the box, pretty much ready for somebody to use without having to have a degree in either engineering or computer science to be able to make it work.
Brilliant. And that the purpose of that coding is to do that first initial energy assessment to kind of create that baseline of the school's performance, right? So, and that's key, right? Is when you combine that with the smart or advanced meter data at kind of a half hourly level, you combine that with the data that the microbits are capturing, that gives the school the baseline. And I think that's important because one of the things that we quite often talk about is energy insights alone, right? And just understanding energy patterns and usage and if you combine that with the data that we're getting from the microbits, then that level of behavioural change is really significant. In loads of other work that we've done, we've shown that just energy insights alone can save sort of 7 to 8% in energy a year, which for a school's budget is pretty significant. So that's not to be sniffed at all, and that's really important. One of the most exciting bits though is that when you combine that with the data from the microbits, is that for me that just sets kids' minds racing. The stuff that you can do with it beyond. And we talked about some great use cases where they recode them to blue tack it to a teacher's kettle and start to understand how much the teachers are spending on cups of tea and what the grid mix is at the time and all that kind of stuff, which is great. And I think that's subconsciously building in a real understanding of energy in a education setting where they're not only just learning about this technology and what's available, but also why it matters. And that's really important. We hope that this will get to a point where kids are going home from school saying, at a very minor benefit, saying we should get a smart meter because look at what we can do and the behavioural changes we can make if we understand it. But at a more significant level, there is a huge amount of carbon footprint generated by public buildings, and we know this. If we are going to transition the country to net zero, then schools, buildings are going to be quite difficult to do so, right? So this baseline and this understanding of opportunities for behavioural change is brilliant, but also the retrofit options that microbits and the platform will identify is really important as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that, I can't remember the exact stat, but it's something like, I think that central government's carbon footprint, something like 37% of that is represented by schools. So a big old chunk of government's entire carbon footprint is a function of schools. And one of the things that sort of initial pack goes out, unwrap it. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to deploy these microbits around the school pre-coded. So this one is for temperature, this one is for door opening and close, this one is for your photocopy machine, we want to see how often you're running, and this one's for the school canteen to work out how often you're doing X, Y, and Z. But in addition to that, it's not just a case of sending these things around the school. It's also the kids are doing an audit. So they will walk into a classroom and they'll go, is it double glazed? Are there curtains on the windows? So i.e., is it going to be more insulated as a consequence of that? What is the material that the floor is made out of? Right. So i.e., how good is it at retaining heat or losing heat? Right. Does it have soft close on the door rather than being left open? So they will look at a lot of fabric related elements when they're actually deploying it, and that's quite important because the school stock in the UK, well, we've seen it with the rack problem, right? There are some very, very old, very inefficient schools, and a lot of them probably don't have, short of paying somebody a really large amount of money to come and do an audit, they don't have particularly great insights into how good, bad, or indifferent the fabric is. They certainly don't have a database of it. The DFE don't have a database of it, as far as I'm aware. Their ability to understand at a granular school, classroom, laboratory level what it's made out of. I mean, and rack is a good example. It's taken an absolute disaster for everybody to work out that it turns out there's a whole load of concrete that could fall down. There are lots of other things within schools where no one really knows. This is a good way of starting to gain a much better understanding as to the fabric of those buildings. And once you understand the fabric of the building, you can start to work out what do we need to do. It also helps the school make a business case, right? So we are hemorrhaging heat here. We are in the bottom quartile of performance as a function of we've done all the behavioral stuff we can do. There is nothing else we can do. We may as well be shoveling. We may as well just be sticking our heater out on the patio and just letting it, heat the fields for all the benefit that we've got here. We need to do something, but you need the evidence.
Yeah.
In order to be able to lobby, whether it's government or the school governors or whoever it is, to basically say we need to spend money on this. And that's the sort of thing that this begins. Because what you basically got, if you go into a school, you've got 30 little energy audit engineers running around, probably getting up everyone's nose massively, but nonetheless running around deploying these things and going, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And here we now have, the evidence to say we need to do something about it. So I think it's really good from that perspective.
One of the things to stress, I guess, as well, is that because this was done in conjunction with teachers and the universities as well, this is as tightly aligned to the curriculum as possible, and one of the STEM features as well of the curriculum as well, which is really important because, it sounds fantastic, but teachers have got a lot on, so this isn't a huge amount of effort, and I think the important thing is that it's very neatly aligned to curriculum. It's very teacher friendly, right? So as well as the lesson plans, there's lots of material on how to deliver the lessons. There's lots of back end support from MyUtilityGenius as well as SMS. But ultimately it's child led as well. And I think that's what's critical about this, is that we are creating these little energy champions to go and audit their own school, as you say, and in doing so also creating potential career paths and a clear understanding of where those what opportunities children might have in the energy industry, which is massive, because it is something that is inevitable, that is going to be a pretty big part of their future, is something to do with net zero at some point in their career. So really found like strong stepping stone, I think, into the future for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it taps into the zeitgeist, right? I don't think anyone would have imagined 8-10 years ago that you would have had a 16-year-old girl mobilizing millions of people around the world, and she didn't mobilize them by starting with adults. Started with the kids, right? Because ultimately it's their future. I'm probably going to be dead and buried by the time some of this really potential doomsday scenario stuff actually comes out. But they're not. They're still going to be around. They're still going to want to do something about that. And so this marries, sort of something that they're naturally really interested in and focused on anyway, with practical steps to be able to start to better understand what their role might be in this new 100% renewable zero carbon world that hopefully they'll inhabit post 2050 or whenever we manage to achieve something. So it is very useful from that perspective in terms of giving them practical ability to engage with the subject. And as you say, it has been developed by universities with an eye on what teachers need to deliver, how they need to deliver it. Even down to the PowerPoints and the fact sheets and the checkbox. Take this little form out and go wander around your school and do X. It has all that material attached to it, so it should be a bit of a plug and play for teachers to be able to say. And I'm sure there will be teachers that will be nervous about the coding element of it. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's not. You're not using JavaScript here, although you can. So there is the option. This is where it goes to the further education guys versus the year sixes. You can do a JavaScript version of this, but a lot of it's more just a bit more like Scratch. The way that Microsoft works is it's just jigsaw puzzles and building stuff up. So it's pretty intuitive in terms of how it works. It's quite clever stuff. I'd love to say we invented it. We didn't never much to do with that, to be fair. But it should be something that teachers can pretty easily use, and certainly. And it feeds into a number of different types of teachers as well, right? So it'll feature for science teachers. It'll feature with people that are just looking at topics. So, topic for the term is climate change, right? Yeah. So that's very much more of a primary school kind of focus. But you're also going to get the guys that are doing, ICT and, the beginning of coding, and heads of computer departments at senior schools will also be able to take huge chunks out of it as well. So it's quite it has broad appeal depending on different age groups.
Great. We talked about from an equipment and technology point of view, we talked about the microbits, obviously, but some of the other equipment that we give the schools when they sign up is a TV screen, isn't it? Right. So, which is a legacy on from the Samsung days.
It's a Samsung TV.
You can imagine it's a Samsung TV.
Yeah, it's definitely Samsung.
But that's really important as well, because what that creates is we have an energy dashboard, right? So, and we've spoken a lot about energy insights in the past, but that's where you create an environment where above reception or somewhere like that, there's a rolling dashboard of the school's performance in terms of how much energy it's buying, in terms of what the grid mix is, some hints and tips, some educational points, some snippets to take away, and just having that visually in the school is really, really powerful. I think it shows the school is committed as well, which is really important, but it also shows a kind of a relaxed push on how important it is to the students as well. One of the primary schools in particular has kind of polar bears and penguins racing on bar charts, comparing against previous weeks. And I know we can start to now gamify it a little bit, and you can have competitions with local schools to see who's making the biggest reductions and things like that. And again, that's something that clearly as we go through further education, we have kind of less polar bears and penguins on graphs, but exactly the same applies, right? That if you're in a reception kind of area or a community-led area, then that visual rolling dashboard of how the school is or the building is performing and the measures that are being taken place by the children is so powerful and engaging.
Yeah, and we've spent quite a bit of time at trying to work out how to benchmark this stuff, because you could be in a really drafty, poorly insulated school, best will in the world, you're going to come bottom of the table if all it comes down to is consumption per pupil. So what you then start looking at is the delta. So how much have you improved? It's a bit no different actually to SATs, right? SATs is really about measuring how much incremental difference you made to a pupil over their period in school, right? This is kind of the same. It's like, it doesn't matter where you start, it's what you did with where you started. And we will give people and we'll give schools and by schools, because as you said, there's a rolling dashboard, that schools means school governors, it means the parents, it means the pupils, it means the faculty, it means everybody has an insight into how well their school is doing versus their own personal benchmark, as well as how they do versus other schools, who again will need to be benchmarked on a similar thing. So it's not a question of, I'm in a brand new school and therefore I'm always going to look like I'm really efficient. Well, if you actually used more this week than you used last week, you're still not going to be top of the ladder, because actually in terms of an incremental position, you've actually backslid slightly versus some of the other guys that have made definite incremental moves forward. So it also has the benefits. And one of the things that I like about the platform, and especially the relationship with SMS, is that it's not just about smart. It's also about the boring old stuff that's been around for 25, 30 years, right? It's about your half-hourly COP3 and COP5 meters. It's about taking the big meters information and bringing it into a consolidated view for the school. So they've got, a half-hourly meter, they've got 3 non-half-hourly meters, and they've got 7 gas meters because they kept expanding and chucked a new gas meter on every time they stuck a new block on. You can bring all of that into one place and start to have a better understanding and a better view from a consolidated perspective. And that's quite unique, I think, because there's very few, if any, I don't know if there are any really, mechanisms or platforms that are giving you the ability to look at that, and then specifically to look at it through the prism of the stakeholders that are involved. How many kilowatt hours per pupil are we consuming? How many kilowatt hours per square meter are we consuming? How much are we spending? What it also does is it brings all the spend data in as well. So in addition to this just being about kilowatt hours, because kilowatt hours is a pretty nebulous thing, right? I mean, yes, it's fine if you are studying energy at school, which my daughter is in the process of studying, thermal energy and, kinetic energy and all that sort of stuff. But kilowatt hours is not necessarily how you tend to think. You tend to think in pounds. And having all the contract data in there as well, which means what the spend is, what the spend is at each individual level, you can then, and that starts to enable you to paint pictures, right? Because you can start to say, right, well, we saved as much last week as means that effectively, from a carbon perspective, it was the equivalent of a flight to New York and back or whatever, as well as we saved enough money to plant 100 trees in the New Forest, for example. So there's lots of things that you can basically hang your hat on from kids' perspective, especially if you start to visualize that stuff and it starts to go up, not just in terms of graphs, but as you say, penguins, polar bears, whatever it is, things that are engaging.
That's a really interesting point. I think the one of the things is just to step back to when you're in the funded trial, right, and the development of it. What was the general feedback from the schools that were in the trial? Was it? I mean, it sounds obvious that this should be a thing that schools and children should be lapping up and really getting involved in. But what was the output?
I think statistically, so obviously we had to produce reports for bays and that sort of stuff. So I think it was measured at 89% of the schools effectively said that it significantly increased their engagement with energy, not just the school's engagement, but the pupils' engagement, the stakeholders, the faculty, everybody else's engagement, which is a pretty good step change. I mean, 100% would be better, but 89% is pretty close to that. So there was a significant increase in engagement. There were schools that after the initial beta trial had basically stopped, wanted to continue going with it anyway, despite the fact that actually a lot of the services in that interim period fell away to a certain extent whilst we were transitioning from the old beta model with the Bayes funded project to a sustainable ongoing model that would effectively we'd then be able to roll out over the coming decades. You still had the old schools frantically trying to find ways of actually using the old one before we got an opportunity to move them onto the new platform and the new model. So there is unquestionably a thirst for this type of capability and activity. And more generally, the kids just loved doing stuff with doing practical things. It wasn't just about looking at a graph or looking at a data table. That's not massively interesting to me, and I'm nearly 50. Certainly isn't interesting to your average 11 or 12-year-old. They're far more interested in widgets and things that move and things that light up and running around and doing stuff with their mates. And this definitely tapped into all of that. So yeah, we had pretty universal excitement about it. And the only thing that didn't work particularly well was the fact that it was almost slightly ahead of its time with the smart metering stuff, right? Anyway, right, yeah.
We talked about the feedback that we've had in the trials, right? And that was great. But I remember I was on a stage at the Institute of Mechanical Engineering doing a talk on it last year, I think. And in the audience was a group of students that had come in, and we had a really fascinating conversation with them. And one of the things they wanted to know was how children could start to learn about it and take it into their schools and go and promote it up towards the teachers, which is the trick, right? Because we can sit and talk about this, and it makes sense. Should be the easiest thing to go and implement into schools, but as we know, that landscape is very challenging to make decisions. And one of the students in particular was desperate to go and put this into their school because they were convinced that they just had a fortune spent on some foil-backed windows, right, and lots more insulation, and the impact was just that the school got hotter, and they really wanted to go and put these microbits in to be able to say, well, actually, you've made these improvements to the makeup of the building, but actually we're not seeing a reduction in energy at all because you've still got the thermostat up higher, and now the building is just hotter, right? So I think that's a great example of not just leading education in the performance of the building at the moment, but post retrofit and post change, understanding what the impact that has been. And these students were convinced that the school hasn't actually made a change. The building's just too hot now. So I think that's a really powerful example of children chomping at the bit to go and try and get this implemented into their school so they can show their teachers the real impact of what they've done.
And one of the other things actually that there's one school basically that one of the insights that came about specifically because they were understanding at a more granular level what was going on was I think this was over COVID, and they used to have a Zumba class that would run every evening at 7, And so the BMS system in the school was all set up to ensure that the Zumba ladies were able to exercise to their heart's content in a pleasant environment. But obviously during COVID, no one was doing any Zumba. Everybody's like sitting in their house feeling sort of slightly nervous rather than going out and doing anything. But the school was still, the BMS system was unaware of COVID and was continuing to heat the hall every Wednesday at 7 o'clock for an hour. And there's lots and lots of that sort of stuff that's happening all the time across the UK, especially actually schools almost more than anywhere else, because they're so cash strapped that they're always letting their hall, letting their fields, trying to find ways of, driving a bit of extra revenue and that sort of stuff. And that often comes with, a varying use of energy within the building. But those things aren't permanent. They're like temporary, and people just lose track of what they're doing. And so all of this type of thing really helps to identify that. So yeah, there's lots of little sort of.
And that's where the rolling dashboard comes in as well, isn't it? Because you can get a live view of what the school is doing now as well. So, if somebody's about to leave and are walking out and they can see that the live consumption of the school is in the red, for example, then clearly something's wrong. So I think not only does it bring awareness and immediate awareness to make change and behavioural changes, but also to that, that example you gave around a school letting a hall out, you could actually let a hall out and tell them exactly how much it's cost to run.
Yeah, so you're not losing money, because I think a lot of them were actually losing money doing some of this activity.
And this is the type of thing that children can run, right? This isn't more work for teachers to do. This is the beauty of the platform is that the children can actually run this level of information and data within the platform.
Yeah, and they're a good job of being like a squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
Kids.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah. Good. And I think what's really compelling about that, though, is that's when we talk about 89% of the schools were kind of wanted to continue to take action and make further changes to the school in both behavioural and more significant changes, is it's children-led. I mean, what a perfect example of having a school start their energy transition that's led by its own students. And for those students to go through that experience of, let's say, retrofitting a school, the learnings that they'll take out of that over and above some PowerPoint presentations in a lesson is just immeasurable. That's exactly what we want to create, and that's why I think this is so important. So trial's really successful. We're now at a point where we've got a partnership going between MyUtilityGenius and SMS. That's got it to a point where effectively we are committed to ensuring that the baseline is there, right? So what does the typical kind of sign-up journey look like for a school once they've signed up? And I guess before you answer that, who takes it into schools? Because one of the landscape of getting a school to make a decision is with academies and trusts and partnership schools and the churches and things like that is pretty complex. So what are the routes to getting into a school, and then what does the sort of setup look like?
So the routes for going into a school haven't been particularly well defined as of yet. I mean, I think that there was huge optimism that we could maybe use central government, DFE. That's proved challenging for a number of reasons. Principally around the fact that they've got other things on, people keep changing, personnel keep changing, that sort of stuff. We've definitely found trusts are easier to work with because they have a degree of autonomy that means that they can make decisions without having to defer to somebody else, which just elongates the decision making massively. In terms of how typically the sort of onboarding process, right from just I'm interested, what next? So I'm interested is going to the website, which is energyinschools.co.uk. So they can pitch up at the website and they can register their interest. We would then effectively get hold of them, take them through, what it is, how to work, what the costs are, what they're going to get, and what sort of resources they're going to need internally at the school to kind of make the whole thing work and to, pull the relevant strings. We then got a big onboard, well, not big is the wrong word, a comprehensive onboarding package that basically says, in order to be able to make this work, you're going to need to give us, some copies of your bills, your current supply contract. You're going to have to sign a letter of authority that enables SMS to be able to access your your half-hourly data if you've got a half-hourly meter. Ideally, you want to be making SMS, your MOP, your DC, and your DA, because that makes it a lot easier in terms of us getting data, as well as installing smart meters to all those meters that are traditional, O3 and O4s, or maybe even O1s and O2s, that basically need to be smartened up so that you can get the full data set in. Typically, actually, it's not, in my experience, it's not been that difficult to convey the fact that this thing really works quite well. It's more being able to talk to people that have the ability to effectively make decisions, I think is the bit. And we haven't really rolled that out on a mass scale yet in terms of marketing, in no small part because we're still fine-tuning, delivery and that sort of stuff. So what you don't want to do is to suddenly find 1,000 schools knocking on your door going, although, just caveat, more than happy to have 1,000 schools knocking on our door, by the way. But, it's definitely one of those things where we wanted to make sure that everything is working, and that you've got supply chains involved in this, right? You're sourcing microbits, you're sourcing batteries, you're sourcing LED light strips, you're getting TVs that need to be delivered. You've got to make sure that you've got the necessary processes and templates in place to ensure that the school can basically register themselves correctly and all that sort of stuff. So this podcast in many ways is part of okay, we're now ready to go now.
That's critical though, to get it right, because especially with teachers, if you introduce something that's going to be labor intensive, clunky, not that clear, and time consuming, you're going to lose engagement very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we've kind of exited the trial period. We've had a good period of time now where we're very happy with the technology and the new website and things like that. Which is great, and I think we've got some schools coming on board now as well, which is brilliant and gives us even more learnings, and actually has forced us to change some things, hasn't it, in terms of taking it out from kind of primary school into further education settings and stuff like that. So I think that's really important that we've taken time to get this right, so that it's really a slick sign-up journey, and teachers and students see value day one. Right, that's really important. That's where we kind of continue to get that engagement. Because it's very dangerous to take students and children on a journey of capturing interest to then disappoint, because that's definitely a dangerous and a slippery slope, and especially something that's so important to the country. So I think the sign up journey is brilliant, right? And we've spent a lot of time in making sure that that's slick and works well, and that was really important. We did that. One of the things that we've I guess accidentally discovered is that there are lots of other routes into schools, right? Whether that's large corporates or big brands that have either got a presence within a school or have an outreach program, right? So some big corporate players that we're talking to at the moment have an outreach program where they provide either cash or sponsor PE kits and things like that into local schools within the community. And some really interesting conversations we're having now around how we can sub-brand the product, and some of these corporates can take this into their local schools, to their offices and things like that. So I think that's something that we're definitely really keen to continue to explore in 2024 and beyond, isn't it? Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think that the sort of the line between schools and employment is getting more blurred, right? So you now have apprentice related degrees. You've got employers starting to look at the schools as well as the universities in terms of how can we better, because obviously the UK, I think is pretty universally agreed, has got a bit of a skills issue in certain areas. And that ultimately impacts employers, because employers are struggling to find people that can do the jobs that they need them to do. So reaching into schools is quite good. Having a relationship with schools, if you're a corporate, this is a really low cost way of delivering significant value into schools, is basically saying, we're in the Manchester area as a manufacturing business. And so there are, primary schools dotted around our manufacturing plant or dotted around our office space. And, well, we should basically sponsor a couple of the schools to basically get all of this stuff in, because it's going to upskill all of the kids in those schools, not just this year, But most of the cost is an upfront cost around, assets and, TVs and microbits and all that sort of stuff, which all obviously cost money. Once you've got that in the school, then every year that comes through, they just do their own climate change, energy module where they basically learn about how this stuff works, which gives them that base understanding of how energy, climate, sustainability, zero carbon works, which is what, as a country, we should be aiming to be like a big player in that space, right? Because that's an area that we can theoretically have a significant comparative advantage. In order to do that, it will definitely help employers, from a PR perspective as well. It's like, this is not like you're gonna, you're having to sort of, sponsor a school hall for £1 million.
Yeah.
This is really, relatively speaking, small beer for corporates. They spend more money on their pub team, where you can basically effectively then get schools kitted up, ready to go, so that they can actually not only can they bring their pupils through in a more rounded way, but quite frankly, the energy crisis has seriously hit schools.
Yeah.
We're talking about commodity prices that are 2 to 3 times what it was historically over the long-term run rate. Schools are sucking that up. This is, I don't know where they're getting their money from, because I don't think that they're just getting massive additional amounts of cash. So one of the easiest ways for them to start to impact their budgets, and this is the really practical bit of this, is how the hell do we use less? How do we use less of this stuff? And in order to use less, you need to know where you're using it. This is a very good thing for them to start to understand they can use it. So if you're a corporate sponsor, or you are somebody that is has a vested interest in our schools doing well and our pupils doing well, then this is a nice low-cost way of helping pupils, helping schools reduce costs, reduce carbon, because obviously the net effect of all of this is also actually reducing carbon. So that then potentially taps into scope 3 emissions and all that kind of stuff, where you're looking at that. So there's lots of good things that can be done by just engaging in this in a meaningful way.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Skills gap you touched on that then, which is really important. I mean, if you look at the kind of the stuff that we're starting to look at in SMS and in kind of year 5 to 15, right? The amount of activities that is going to be on retrofitting homes and flexibility markets and stuff like that, right? As we start to smooth the grid and get rid of some peaks and use assets and install assets and optimize assets. And I think one of the things that we've learned in a number of the other projects that we do is that there is a significant skills gap. But also, practically speaking, if you think about where we are going to hit these peaks of activity in flexibility and optimization of assets and installation of assets, it's inevitably going to be done by people that are in schools now, right? So this is the perfect opportunity to start engaging at that level now. And if we can create this concept of energy champions within schools at key stage 2 and all the way up through further education using platforms like this, is just fantastic.
Yeah, and it's like these pupils won't only be the providers of skills for the future. They're our future consumers. And the reality is we're going to need a lot more prosumers than we got now. This whole idea of, I'm just going to buy electricity from the local power company down the road at a single unit rate for the year is very unhelpful to the country decarbonizing. We need our consumers to start to understand this stuff. There's no point trying to teach them in their 60s. We need them to be learning how the energy market, and this stuff all just teaches them. Even if they go off and they become a lawyer, or they go off and they start becoming a copywriter and advertiser, it doesn't matter. They will still be consuming energy at home. They will need to understand how it works, because we want them to be installing solar panels and getting a battery and vehicle to grid, and they'll be driving an EV. And if they don't understand how their behaviors and how their assets can be beneficial to the planet as well as beneficial to their pocket, we're going to be doing a lot of hard yards teaching when they're older, and old dog, new tricks and all that stuff. You'd far rather them have this really great baseline of understanding how electricity works from the time they're like 10, 11, 12. Because then, you suddenly have this much smarter consumer, as well as people that, if the inclination takes them in that direction, they're going to be the engineers of the future, or the modelers of the future, or the coders of the future, or whatever it is. And they're the ones that are then going to bootstrap us into hopefully a better future.
Brilliant. Thank you. Look, I'm convinced. I think it's a brilliant product. Thank you very much, Guy. Really enjoyable.
No worries. Thanks for having me in.
Cheers. Hi, it's Tom again. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you'd like to hear more from energy experts and innovators, please like, follow and subscribe to Energy Matters podcast.